Serious. People who almost died, but lived because of a gut decision. What's your story? In 1976, I was on vacation with my parents in Colorado and we drive through Big Thompson Canyon. My mom, brother and I all wanted to stay at one of the little hotels within the canyon, but my dad said no, and we continued on our way home to Illinois. After we got home, we saw on the news that the canyon flooded, killing over 100 people. Had we stayed there, we would have probably been killed too. When I was 14, my cousin and I found my uncle's gun stashed in his closet. My cousin grabbed a pistol and pointed it at my head with his finger on the trigger. I quickly told him to stop, and that's not funny. He glared at me and told me it's not loaded while he pointed it at the floor and pulled the trigger. Gun was loaded and blew a big hole in the floor. I think about this a lot. I brought it up once to my cousin and he started to cry. That experience cut us both deep. One time working at a grocery store at night, I had cart duty, and had to collect all the carts from the parking lot and bring them into the store. It was dark out and I had my headphones in, and I was looking at the ground and pushing a chain of carts, when suddenly it got darker. I stopped for a split second to wonder how it could get darker when it was already night, and bam! One of the huge 30+ feet high parking lot lights smashed onto the ground right in front of me, hit the carts and missed me by 2 feet. The metal had rusted out and it snapped at the base. If I hadn't stopped to wonder how it got darker, I would have definitely died. In 2016, my wife and I were in Berlin to explore and visit the Christmas markets. The plan for that evening was to go out to eat and then get the train back to stop into the markets at Breitscheidplatz, as it was close to our hotel. This had been the plan for the entire trip, as it was the last night. We had finished our meal and were headed to the train station. Just as we were about to board the train, my wife decided that she didn't want to go to the markets at Breitscheidplatz and would prefer to double back to a smaller one we had passed on the walk from the restaurant to the station. I, being a stubborn prick, didn't want to change the plans, but she got her way and we headed back, staying at the smaller market for about 30 minutes. After finally getting the train back, we got off and walked towards our hotel. After a minute or so, there appeared a seemingly never-ending stream of emergency vehicles. Not knowing what was going on, but obviously something serious, we speeded up and locked ourselves in the hotel room. We had the English language 24 news channel on, and after about an hour, reports started to come through about the terrorist attack. A man had driven a truck into a crowd at the Breitscheidplatz market. Obviously, I'll never know if we would have been in the exact spot, but we definitely would have been there at the same time, and I am never allowed to complain about my wife changing her mind ever again. I was traveling in the Philippines in northern Luzon. That's the part always hit hard by typhoons. It was just the beginning of rainy season. I was in Binay and was planning to go up north to Sagada the next day, Saturday. The Lonely Planet writes about this route as the scariest road in the world. It's solid mountain on one side, and deep up on the other. There was a jeepney scheduled in the morning and one in the afternoon. Everyone who knows me knows that I'm not a morning person, and if there is a later option, I'm definitely taking this one. On a whim the night before, I decided to leave earlier and take the 8 a.m. jeep. Super out of character for me, and I'm still not sure why I did it. A few days later, on another bus, I chatted with this nice lady and she asked me what places in the Philippines I've been to so far. And she says, "OMG, have you heard about the jeepney accident on Saturday afternoon on the road from Binay to Sagada?" So apparently the jeepney I planned to take came upon a mountain slide, lost control and went down the side of the mountain. 10 people died. No one survived. My mom, I was almost 15. I had put on a lot of water weight and she was worried about it. Finally I was in pain and she realized it was literally just water weight, so took me to the hospital. First her was like, "Oh yeah, it's just thyroid," Take this and follow up with your doctor." Mom waited a few hours but felt uncomfortable, so she drove me to another who told her if she hadn't gotten me in when she did, I would have died before the follow-up. My kidneys had failed. I'm better now. Gut decision. I had a change in my bowel movements, went to the doctor, got screened for colon polyps, and had a huge one removed. It would have eventually turned into cancer. Scopes aren't fun, but they save lives. I went to my urologist with epididymitis. He found the smallest amount of detectable blood in my urine on a whim. He sent me to have an IVP. They put dye in your blood and radiologist has a look. He saw a mass on my left kidney. 20 minutes later I knew I had cancer when I saw the blood supply to the mass. That was on Thursday. Tests Friday. Monday he took out my kidney with a grapefruit-sized stage 3 tumor. There was no margin. Many years later my wife told me the doctor told her that I had a 50-50 chance of living 6 months. That was 1992. Lucky me. I was drinking and felt something stick in the back of my throat. I almost forced it down because it was really far back and awkward to cough up, but I decided to spit it out anyways. It was a shard of glass from the bottle I was drinking out of. It still creeps me out to think about even years later because I really was just going to swallow it. I was out late one night. My car had broken down in the middle of an interchange that was so deserted there was no one there for miles. I did what any other person would do and called a towing number, and when I finally got through it was almost 1 a.m. I decided to go take a piss down at some bushes when suddenly I heard some bikes approaching the car. I wanted to head out immediately to stop them for help when my legs froze and I thought twice. From behind the bush I basically saw them try to ransack the car, and apparently they were all armed. Thank goodness I remained still because these guys meant business. They fired multiple shots into the windscreen and door. It was an old Toyota Hilux, so there was nothing in there. They busted all 4 wheels with bullets before getting back on their bikes and zooming off. I believe they were all high, which was why they didn't bother to check around, or maybe they thought I just deserted that area. Long story short, I walked a bit further into an open field and sat on the thick branches of a tree where I could see approaching objects. The towing truck didn't get there until past 4 a.m. in the morning, and I can tell ya all that was the longest night of my life. I made it home in one piece. Mid-1990s. Traveled to northern New Jersey with a friend from college. It was his hometown. We had plans to visit New York City and see a former roommate who graduated the year before. Friend 2. Well, apparently friend 2 dabbled in low-level organized crime since his last years in college. We had some knowledge of this but were not involved. He invited us to an associate's house with plans to go out afterward. We declined. Not our scene. In fact, both of us had applied to law school. I planned to pursue a career in federal law enforcement thereafter. We both wanted distance from that nonsense. We tried the following day to reach our friend 2 for a low-key lunch before heading out of town. No answer. Well, local police found his body 2 days later, along with 2 other bodies, at the house to which he invited us. He was murdered at the meeting. Social situation. Could have been us too. I knew that was bad news. Former professional motorcycle instructor here. I was riding a motorcycle at night on Highway 17 in Northern California, an infamously dangerous and twisty mountain pass with low visibility around most corners. Each direction of the highway has 2 lanes. For no particular reason, I decided to change lanes. Around the next corner, there was a washing machine in my original lane that was only visible after it would have been too late to avoid. At highway speeds, a collision like that would have sent me to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. That one still messes with my head. Few years ago went on a trip to Cuba and Mexico. Last minute decided to stay longer in Havana despite mess that Hurricane Irma has left behind. Few days without electricity was actually oddly amazing. We were supposed to be flying to Mexico City. Our Mexico City Airbnb building collapsed during earthquake. There was no logical reason behind our decision about staying. I just proposed it and my partner agreed. Crazy. While fishing on a large lake in Canada, we were a little more than halfway across when the wind really started picking up and a storm started rolling in. I had the choice to turn back, or head to an island with a bay. I decided to head for the bay, and just as we reached the calmer water we looked behind us and the storm had gotten worse. We were in an aluminum boat, and if we had chosen to head back, 3 of us would have drowned. No doubt in my mind. We were already taking on water and were completely drenched when we beached on the island. Once the storm abated, we made the journey back and it still took 4 hours and high wind for a normally half-hour boat trip. Warming up in the truck was the best feeling in the world after that. I was riding my bike to school as normal when I was about 12 and I stopped at a crossing. All the cars stopped but I felt that something was off and waited a little longer. As soon as I started to cross, there was a flash of green as a Range Rover speeded past me barely a hair from the front wheel of my bike. If I had started to cross sooner then I would have been hit head-on and most likely not have survived as the car was going that fast. I was so shaky that I turned round and headed home explaining to my mom what happened. As I was still shaking, she believed me and made me a hot chocolate. I'm not sure we would have died but it wouldn't have been pretty. We had a fire going in the backyard at a friend's house. My friend's dad decided to burn some junk from the garage, mostly old boxes and papers and stuff. So we're helping feed that stuff into the fire. I grabbed the next small box to throw in and I can tell there's something in this one. There had been stuff in most of them but it was always just pamphlets and little bits of packaging, so we had stopped really checking and were just throwing them in. Well, I'm standing there with the box over the fire about to drop it when I decide to check this one. It was full of live mortar shell fireworks. My friend's dad decided we had burned enough garage junk at that point. I was 22 years old, backpacking through the Patagonia for 6 months camping wherever I could. One day I was fishing by the lake with my comp already set down for the night save for starting the fire. I kept hearing rustling some 30 meters behind me in the tree line, so I stared for a while hoping to see a deer or something. Next thing I know I'm staring down a puma right in the eyes. I started to get up ready to take a sprint but right as I was standing up I remembered I was warned against this, so instead I grabbed some rocks from the ground and started throwing rocks and shouting and throwing my arms up in the air until it left me alone. That night I stayed up late next to the fire and then went to try to sleep scared as fuck. That was my only encounter with wildlife in the whole trip, save for birds and stuff. There was a derecho a while back, kind of like a land hurricane, extremely high winds from the upper atmosphere, and it really didn't seem that bad at first. My ex even decided to take the dog out to play in the rain, but I just got this weird feeling and ended up insisting they come in and we all go to the basement. Who knows if we'd have died. But about 10 minutes later the wind really picked up and a good portion of our roof collapsed, followed shortly by nearly every tree within 300 of our house falling over. It took 4 or 5 months to get the house fixed. It's funny as my dog was always scared of the basement before then. Enough I had to carry him down during that storm, but after it became his safe place he'd go anytime there was a storm or if I was out of the house. Friends invited me to play games at another friend's house in the burbs, but we both lived near downtown. I normally jump at the chance to go hang out, but this time I was just off. I thought about going and then texted and changed plans, even though I wasn't planning anything else, just to be at home. They texted as close to midnight to show their backseat touching the back of their front seat. They were rear-ended on the highway going 75 and the guy was going fast enough to smash the entire back of the car in. Luckily I wasn't in it. When I was 7 or 8 we lived in the jungle area of Franklin Park, at the end of the first 747 runway in the late 1960s/early 70s, when the 747s went over blotted out the sun and you couldn't hear anything over the engine roar for a full minute. Planes are a lot quieter these days. It was all apartments and it was well known for pimps and drugs and factories. My brother and his friend and I were playing by a factory that was being built out of cement blocks. My brother and his buddy made a fort out of some blocks and they found a piece of plywood to act as a top. One afternoon a serious storm started to blow and I knew there were tornado warnings. They wanted to stay in the fort for the storm because it would be really cool, but after a very loud and close lightning strike I left and ran for our apartment. The storm lasted 45 minutes and the wind and thunder were terrible. My brother never came home, so afterward I went looking for him. One of the walls of the factory that was under construction had collapsed and had fallen on our fort. It was flat as a pancake. I walked around trying to see if they were there, but there didn't seem to be any smashed kids. Then I went home where my brother had just shown up and he said they had gone to his friend's apartment after I left. I took him to see out for it and we just kinda never talked about it again. Was standing in line outside of the Club Mohawk during SXSW 2014 to see Tyler the Creator. At the last minute decided I'd rather go back to Stubbs and catch Damon Albarn's set. As I headed back up the street a drunk driver trying to escape the police smashed the barrier, missed me by inches and killed 4 people I was standing next to. My dad told me the story of a group of teenagers from our town who were driving around and goofing off, and the driver started speeding and driving super recklessly. One of the kids demanded he slow down, and the rest of the group made fun of him, so the kid said, "Let me out here." After a few more jabs, the driver finally pulled over, and the kid got out, and his friend sped away. Just a few miles down the road the driver lost control. Nobody survived. Hit by a car while riding a motorcycle. Old lady who could barely see in Palm Beach ran a light and hit me. Augustine S. Florida, and for some reason that day I put on a leather jacket and full face helmet. Helmet and leathers destroyed. I walked away. Definitely had the feeling that a power greater than myself made that decision for me. I had been bleeding and in pain for a month, and every time I went to the doctor they brushed me off and said I was having a miscarriage. Finally one night I got super dizzy all of a sudden and was in even more pain. My boyfriend at the time kept telling me I was fine and to go to sleep. Finally at 1:01 in the morning I drove myself to the ER. I had a tubal pregnancy and my fallopian tube had ruptured and I was bleeding internally. Now I trust my gut feelings and tell everyone else to screw off. Early on in my alcoholism I didn't know that withdrawals were a thing, or that they could kill you. At one point I was drinking 2/5 of vodka a day. Considering that my life was falling apart I decided one day to not drink. Big mistake. At first I thought I was just having a bad hangover. My heart was racing even though I wasn't moving around. I was shaking, hallucinating, going numb all over, and began wondering if I should go to the hospital. By the time I got there my heart was beating about 170 per minute while at rest. The doctors acted very quickly and I just remember being surrounded by people, them stripping me, shoving M4 in my neck, and yelling he's gonna seize. After the first seizure I was so messed up they kept hitting me with that event over and over because it wasn't working fast enough. Later on, in the ICU, the docs told me I shouldn't be alive and that they gave me enough Ativan to put down an elephant. When I think about what would have happened had I not gone to the hospital, It makes me sad that I wasn't more educated on the dangers of quitting drinking cold turkey. I was running down escalators to catch a train during winter and happened to slip on some ice on the platform. I slid quite fast on my bum, and I ended up getting stuck in the middle of a train and the platform, thigh high. I couldn't get myself out because of the awkward position, and called for help. The platform was full of people who just stared. I was pulled out by a drunk person just before the train started moving. Had a pulled hamstring and cuts and bruises in my arms and hands. Still get quite angry thinking about the bystanders not doing anything but gape.